Warhammer
Captain of the
Warhammer Fantasy
My
Copy
is in ruins. The
Fandom
is at war. It's
Future
under siege.
Games Workshop
Consumes us all. Here we will make our final stand. Here there will be retribution.
Hello, friends and subscribers. It's been a while since I made an actual video, and to be honest, this was not the video I was intending to end my hiatus with. I am still actually in the middle of making the 2020 year in review. I'm also here to announce that I am on Parler, BitChute, and Rumble, so please follow me there if you haven't already. Anyway, as some of you know, I am a Warhammer 40,000 player. Nearly 4 years ago, I made a video discussing the attempted SJW incursions into Warhammer at the time. The good news is that it appears we kept them at bay and they have fucked off for the time being. Although some SJW-isms did slip through the cracks, so to say, but nothing drastic like the female Space Marines or gender-fluid pygmy custodes or some crazy shit like that. I'm being a bit hyperbolic with that last one if you couldn't tell, but you get the point. The bad news is, if you've been paying attention to the Warhammer 40k spheres of the internet and YouTube and elsewhere, it seems our beloved hobby is about to meet its end anyway. Not from SJWs, but by the greedy, cynical, and spiteful Scrooges who currently run Games Workshop. It's been one thing after another as of late. GW wants to end Fanimations because it'll compete with Warhammer Plus, and they want to go after text-to-speech animations, and eventually they'll come after the lore channels when they released that crappy animated pilot to Hammer and Bolter. That was little more than a glorified ad. And now they want to purge 3D printed models. Plenty of people have done videos on the subject. The usual suspects like Arch, Commissar Gamza, Major Kill, Chapter Master Valric have done videos about the current state of affairs in the Warhammer community. I agreed with most of what these people had to say, but if there was one video that I recently watched that stood out to me the most, I'm gonna be honest, it was a bitter pill to swallow. But as bitter as it was the most correct, and it was this video that convinced me to make this video. Because this thesis is true, and not enough people are saying it. The video I am referring to is called You Are the Problem with Games Workshop by Attention Span Labs. The guy has a smaller subscriber count than me, but luckily as of writing this it sits at around 30,000 views. Which is good, but it needs way more. And definitely more people repeating what he said. I'll link it in a pinned comment below along with my other social media sites, and I will get into what he said, but for now let's address the premise. Are we seeing the end of Warhammer 40,000 as we know it? I suppose it depends on how you know Warhammer 40,000 and what you know of it. As for me, I started playing the game when I was 12 years old back in December 2005. I got into it from my real-life best friend's older brother. When I was in 6th and 7th grade, I would love spending my Saturday afternoons going down to my local hobby shop to play with him, his friends, some of my other friends, and people I knew from school, and others who came by the shop to play. For a time, I became disinterested in 40k, and then tried getting back into it when I was in 8th grade after playing the Dawn of War games, but I didn't actually get back into it more consistently until high school in the summer of 2010, though I've only sporadically played the game since college. I would still buy the models, paint them, bought the codices for my armies throughout the editions, and read some of the books, and played some of the other 40k video and computer games. Over the years, I've seen things come and go, things that I liked and others that I didn't like. Some changes that made Warhammer different from the way I first recognized it. First, we'll take a look at some of the areas where people feel that Warhammer may or may not be losing its way. Warhammer 40,000 stands apart from the other sci-fi far future franchises. It is known for being where the term Grim Darkness comes from, as for its opening title. As we know, if you're a fan of Warhammer, Halo, Star Wars, Star Trek, Mass Effect, or what have you, the 40k universe would be the last one anyone would want to live in. The lore in a minute video put it best.
The Imperium fell into a state of technological regression and brutal dictatorship, and for 10,000 years has been under siege from all sides by every single nasty the universe can throw at it. Basically, life sucks, there's only war, and you're probably going to get eaten by Tyranids. Have fun.
Certain community members like Commissar Gamza argue 40k is losing its grim darkness. And while I think he over-exaggerates how much, his claims are not entirely baseless. For example, I love the 5th edition Dark Eldar by Phil Kelly, and it's just as grim and dark as the other previous Dark Eldar edition. But one of the things I really detested was the 5th edition Necrons. The change from 3rd edition Necrons to 5th edition gives some weight to his claims. The Necrons went from an existential Lovecraftian level threat of being a race of near-invincible robots that kill anything in sight at the whims of their Catan masters, to just Tomb Kings in space. With the Catan now irrelevant, being turned into shards, the Silent King trying to unite dynasties, yeah, I'll say it, fuck the new Necrons. But there's another thing that I witnessed that I didn't like that was sort of the exact opposite. The Tau Empire were introduced in 3rd edition in 2001, and in the grim dark universe of 40k where everything is out to kill you, the Tau are widely regarded as a bunch of goody two-shoes, the real good guys of 40k, even more so than the Imperium of Man, the poster faction of the entire game. They fight for the greater good, and usually tried to get along with the Eldar and humans, although of course still view themselves and their greater good as superior. But a lot of people criticize the Tau for being too good. And so, starting to, I think in 7th edition, Games Workshop actually made the Tau noticeably dark, with the Tau Ethereals implied to be a bunch of sinister clerics using mind control on the Tau species for their own ends, and now put an emphasis on the Tau's eagerness to exterminate populations that do not go along with the greater good. I'm not a Tau player, and I actually disliked them for being the most benevolent of the 40k factions, and loved killing them with my evil factions like my Dark Eldar and Chaos Space Marines. But I actually disliked making the Tau more grimdark. It made the Tau stand out as a faction, and I think it was, for the worse, robbing them of that distinction. Because again, when you try to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. So is 40k shredding its grim darkness that separates itself from the other sci-fi universes like Star Wars, Mass Effect, or Halo? Commissar Gamza thinks so, while Major Kill argues it is not. Overall, I begrudgingly agree with Major Kill. Begrudgingly because he denies SJWs tried to warp 40k into their own image, despite the fact that people like Arch, myself, and others have documented they most certainly did try a couple years ago. But just because their attempts didn't amount to anything significant doesn't mean they didn't try. But anyway, I do believe for marketing to said common masses that GW is trying to make 40k appear less grimdark than it actually is, so the ignorant mom and dads out there won't have to worry about little Jimmy getting into a franchise that has subject matter that's inappropriate for him. Oh, it looks just like Halo. Sure, it has an M rating, but that's only because it's more violent and bloody than Twilight Princess. It's not like GTA where you can beat and rob prostitutes and chop up the police with chainsaws. But overall, the grimdark aesthetics and subject matter is still very much there if you read the books and the codices. I agree, back in 2nd edition the artwork was perhaps a little more grim and to what it is now, but also 2nd edition was a little bit more on the cartoony side. I personally believe the grimdark aesthetics apex was in 3rd edition, in and on the codices. Seriously, none of the subsequent codex art tops stuff like this. However, with the new 9th edition art, I'd say it actually comes the closest to looking like 3rd edition cover art than anything that has come out since 3rd edition. What about some of the other mature aspects about 40k? In my video on the SJWs trying to get their fingers on 40k, I brought up this.
You know, when most people think of 40k characters, they think of Space Marines and other characters clad in heavy body armor meant to shrug off stuff that would normally take out a tank, and they're armed with big guns that are stupidly overpowered. But Lilith isn't anything like that. For one, she's a woman. She's not even human, she's a Dark Eldar. She wears only a few scraps of armor, sports bra, and a thong, and is armed with only 2 blades that are nothing special except they're really sharp. And yet she is more than a match for most things in the 40k universe, taking them all out with relative ease. In short, Lilith has accomplished more than most of the male characters in the 40k universe in this regard. Most of them need special armor and special weapons to be tough, but she only needs enough clothing to cover her private areas and 2 knives. Oh, but of course she's not wearing much clothing, therefore she's too sexualized, and is there only to be objectified by knuckle-dragging, basement-dwelling neckbeards.
Well, the SJWs overall failed, but one area where they did succeed was making my Lilith less spicy. Her best model was the 5th edition model, where she looked like this, and now looks like this. The 9th edition Dark Eldar Codex has many virtues, but out of all the things GW could fuck up, it had to be Lilith. They put more clothes on her and made her more fugglier in the process. Worse, they actually made the vanilla succubus a better option to take onto the battlefield rather than Lilith in regards to stats and abilities. Good job. But to demonstrate my point about, ignorant parents getting their kids into mature subject matter, you'll have to take my word for this. Around the time 5th edition Dark Eldar came out, I remember seeing this video at the time, so more than 10 years ago at this point, of this 12-year-old British kid opening up a box that his parents or whoever ordered for him that had a bunch of new Dark Eldar stuff in it that they just released, like the Warriors, a Raider, and the funniest part, the Incubi bodyguards, which he pronounced as Incubi. But yeah, he also got Lilith and the old prisoner kits. I tried looking for this video to include in here, but I can't find it. But I think the kid identified his channel as Wargamer Harry. Tried looking for that too, but still can't find it. If any of you have seen it, or know that it's still out there, a link would be much appreciated. Point being, yeah, we got 12-year-olds unboxing Dark Eldar, probably the least kid-friendly army in 40k. It's also worth noting that the old metal Slaneshi Demonet models were topless, and now they're also clothed and fugglier. But they made this change back around 2008, so before SJWs were even a thing. But again, that's just the models. If you read the 40k novels, especially books that involve Slaanesh or the Dark Eldar, prepare to still find mature subject matter not intended for the 12-year-olds who have mom and dad buy their models for them. But not only toning down the more adult aspects of 40k, Gamza pointed out the new orcs don't look like 40k orcs that we've all known and loved for decades, but more like Warcraft orcs who have a more clean and crisp-looking armor and clothing, when orcs are supposed to be gritty, greasy, and generally unclean. But one of the more divisive changes in 40k in recent years was the retconning of the 13th Black Crusade and the introduction of the Primaris Marines and bringing back the Primarchs. Many say this is also an attempt to make the 40k universe more black and white and less gray, with the Imperium being the good guys and Chaos as the obvious bad guys. Chaos was always an evil faction, but the Imperium, since the near death of the Emperor, became something of a necessary evil. As a human, you're obviously better off living a miserable existence under the Imperium's boot, rather than left to the mercy of the aliens out there like the Orcs, Tyranids, Dark Eldar, and others. With the return of the Primarchs, particularly Rowboat Guilliman, it is reasonable to conclude that he'll try to steer the Imperium in the more benevolent direction that the Emperor of Mankind originally intended. However, only time will tell if that actually happens if they advance the lore. Wrapping up this section, I don't believe GW making shit like Warhammer Adventures or Nurgle plushies is enough to definitively state that they are making Warhammer less grim-dark across the board. Only in terms of marketing at the worst. GW is, at the worst, doing a bait-and-switch for the unsuspecting normies and ignorant parents. And speaking of bait-and-switch... As long as I have been playing, once in a while Games Workshop would drop a new codex for any army in whatever the current edition was at the time. It was natural to hype up the new release with new models, especially for armies that had gone years without a codex, and perhaps in some cases give them a slight edge over the other armies. The first instance of this to happen that I witnessed when I first started playing was the 4th edition Tau codex when it dropped around April 2006. It was a popular release at the time and made the Tau one of the most popular armies in the game, and this was the first time I personally witnessed the bandwagon effect in 40k. Fans who played one army or another dropped them entirely in favor for the army that just got a hot new release. One of my friends dropped his Space Marine army for the 4th edition Tau, and my best friend's brother, who got me into the game, dropped his Necron army for the Tau. A few years later in 5th edition, when He Who Shall Not Be Named started making codices, he had a habit of making most of the armies he worked on OP, like the 5th edition Blood Angels with their deep striking Land Raiders and flying Librarian Dreadnoughts, and more infamously, the 5th edition Grey Knights. During this time, a lot of people picked up these armies because they were so OP you didn't even have to be that good in order to play and win with them. What initially started off as innocent mistakes back then now became part of GW's release strategy. Starting with the current 9th edition, it seems every release becomes the next big OP army everyone wants to bandwagon on. My beloved Dark Eldar also became victim to this. Like the others, when they came out, they instantly became the most powerful tabletop faction overnight, and everyone started buying and playing them. The 9th edition Dark Eldar is easily the most popular edition of Dark Eldar, even more so than their 5th edition release in late 2010, which was, at the time, their first release in over 12 years. The Dark Eldar went from a niche army to an army that every 12-year-old player and their dad could pick up. And while the 5th edition release did increase their popularity a bit, I remember I was a late teen at the time and, reading online forums of older Dark Eldar fans and neckbeards, complaining about the new fans. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I'm now in their position. And before anyone mentions, but in 6th edition, the Blasterborn Venom Span tactics was one of the most effective strategies in the game. But I'm with Fate 212. That's how a noob played Dark Eldar back in 6th edition. At that time, it was all about the pain tokens, which you really couldn't get playing the Dark Eldar like that. But anyway, like all the other armies in 9th edition, they were significantly nerfed in the subsequent FAQ release. Then AdMech became the top dog until their FAQ release gave them the nerf. The next army to come out will be the same story. OP release, nerfed FAQ, so Games Workshop can get a few extra dollars off of bandwagoners. Their tactic is bait and switch. Release an OP army, then nerf it a month or two later. People often talk about broken video game releases, like how Fallout New Vegas and Cyberpunk 2077 were unplayable, glitch-filled messes when they were first released. People like Razorfist wondered if a car company sells you an unusable car, they should be held liable for damages. Should video games not be held to the same standard when they release broken games? If so, should tabletop games be the same way? Rhetorical question, in case that wasn't obvious enough for you. But with all this in mind, it's fair to say GW, as of late, is more concerned with making a few extra dollars through scummy means rather than making a refined product for their fans to enjoy. Now, how about the basic stuff like marketing? Well, the other day, Arch made a video where he points out that, in a Facebook post, GW, without actually saying it, but heavily insinuated that if one were to subscribe to Warhammer Plus and get the Warhammer 40k app on your phone, they would in turn get access to the upcoming 9th edition Orc Codex, or at least the rules to it. However, it turns out you still need to buy the Codex and redeem the code inside in order to get full access to its contents on the 40k app. Arch Warhammer argues this marketing gimmick GW's doing right here in this post is probably illegal in at least some jurisdictions, if not teetering on the edge of illegality in others. I'd like to think being deceitful when trying to sell a product is illegal. However, since I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to say that it is or it isn't in this particular instance, because I don't know. Illegal or not, at the very least, this is still an unethical and underhanded way of marketing and promotion. If GW cared about its fans and was interested in making a refined product, this segment would not exist. And neither would this video. But it seems, as of late, only the fans are capable of making refined products and media the fans would enjoy, which leads into our next segment. In the post-cable world, every company now has its own streaming service. Disney, Paramount, HBO, and now Games Workshop. Earlier this year, GW announced Warhammer Plus, a streaming service that would obviously promote their products with battle reports, painting tips, and even try to come up with original content like animated series. This would not be the first time GW tried its hand into animation. Back in 2010, so a decade ago, we got Ultramarines the movie. Yeah, remember that? If you don't, I don't blame you. The idea had potential, but as Aragos puts it,
When we first found out there was gonna be a movie about the Ultramarines, sorry I meant Ultra Smurfs, we all thought that it was going to be the bomb. Well, not exactly. The animations and designs were all subpar, like as if it was made back in the 1990s. The story was plain, cliche, and simple, but it was still pretty good.
yeah, pretty mediocre in execution. The opening CGI intro from the first Dawn of War game, which came out in 2004, holds up a fuck of a lot better even today, more so than the animation used in Ultramarines. Even at the time of its release, 6 years later in 2010. But despite its shortcomings, the film did inspire a ton of better executed fan animations in the years to follow. The first of these was the highly anticipated Lord Inquisitor, announced in 2011. It was slated for an early 2013 release, and it was originally going to be 15 minutes long. But Games Workshop, on the right side of things when they caught wind of the Lord Inquisitor, approached the guys behind and even offered them additional funding to make a longer product, now 45 minutes in length. Sadly, however, the project was ultimately abandoned, but they did release what was made up until that point. But we did get more fan animations since then, like Astartes, the Deathcore Krieg, and each of these fan projects are far above Ultramarines in terms and quality, and probably anything else GW itself could put out as an official release. But with the advent of Warhammer Plus, GW has seen fan animations as a threat to its new product. And over the past month or two, we have seen GW go full Microsoft and aggressively eliminate the competition. As we know, Games Workshop decided they no longer wanted fan animations to be made, and despite hiring some of the people behind some of these animations, what does Games Workshop have to show for it on Warhammer Plus? Well, they did release their own animation since Ultramarines the movie. We now have Hammer and Bolter. While it's not a 3D animation, it is more aesthetically pleasing, and would be impressive if this was some kind of amateur animation on Newgrounds or something. But no, this is Games Workshop, a company with millions of dollars at its disposal. The general consensus among those in the Warhammer community who've reviewed it reached the consensus they reached for Ultramarines. Not completely dog shit, but it's still far from impressive for an officially sanctioned release. Additionally, Hammer and Bolter is regarded as little more than a glorified ad, and GW saw fit to purge these animations so they could bring you this. Fanimations aside, Games Workshop first target to strike at was the modding community, particularly those who made mods for Warhammer Total War. On a personal note, I like Warhammer, I like Total War, but now I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that although I have Warhammer Total War, I never actually got around to playing it. But now I must, now that they don't want mods for the game. I also believe it will not end here for mods. The Dawn of War games. have mods. The other Warhammer games have mods. And I believe they will also target mods that incorporate elements of Warhammer for completely unrelated games. I mean, the Fallout games have Space Marine Power Armor mods. Here's betting that sooner or later they'll come for them as well. And then after mods and Fanimations, GW decided it did not want text-to-speech videos of the Brother Alpha Busa variety either.
You know, the Brother Alpha Busa. Some of us, myself included, have been watching for nearly a decade back when he didn't even have 500 subscribers and was originally just known as Alpha Busa. Yep, GW see those as a threat. Because even though they aren't obviously as well as animated as Hammer and Bolter, they're still much funnier to watch. Besides, the animation's not the point. And again, potential competition. We also have unconfirmed rumors that they will eventually come for lore videos, and perhaps even go after channels of people just playing the game. And all for the same reasons. Competition. So, with Warhammer Plus now out, what does Games Workshop have to show for it, aside from Hammer and Bolter? Well, Arch Warhammer in one of his videos showed us one battle report, one tutorial on how to base coat a Black Templars model, probably one of the easiest things to do because it's fucking Black Templars. And only a few issues of White Dwarf, and even then, many of the issues come with half the pages missing because they had rules in them. And the next episode of Hammer and Bolter. For all this, they are charging you $6 a month. Isn't this great? No. People like Arch Warhammer already had low expectations. But seriously, Games Workshop still managed to come up short even then. I'm honestly starting to believe whoever is making these decisions at GW are either clueless or insane. Although those two things aren't exactly mutually exclusive. Do they honestly believe pissing off 90+% of their fandom by getting rid of their favorite things just so we could have Warhammer Plus be a thing free of competition? A thing that nobody asked for? Are you serious? But as Anal Cunt's 1999 album is titled, it just gets worse. The release of Warhammer Plus has been met with generally negative reviews from the fans. Of course, these negative reviews will reach the eyes and ears of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Warhammer fans around the world, convincing them that Warhammer Plus is garbage, which, as we've seen, isn't exactly a hard thing to do. So, of course, Games Workshop has decided to take a trick from Venifang X's playbook and false flag videos reviewing Warhammer Plus under the pretense they are infringing on Games Workshop's IP. Although appalling, it's not surprising. Naughty Dog did the same shit last year, trying to censor leaked spoilers from The Last of Us Part 2. What is surprising is that Games Workshop not only went after videos critical of Warhammer Plus, but even videos that gave Warhammer Plus positive reviews. Yes, you heard me right. They even went after videos that positively reviewed Warhammer Plus. In one of Arch Warhammer's recent videos, he documented that Midwinter Mini's positive review of Warhammer Plus was manually flagged by someone at GW for copyright infringement. Wow. It's like Games Workshop is actively trying to get the very few people left defending them to join those of us who decided to turn our backs on them. Since then, they've lifted the claim stating, "It was done in error," as if the Content ID bot that flagged it was automatic instead of manual. It seems with every passing week, Games Workshop finds a new way to stoop even lower. And this just in. I'm recording this part after I recorded everything else, and began editing the video altogether. A day or two ago, an NDA purporting to be for the Games Workshop influencers appeared on Reddit. And I believe Sig Marxism of all places. You know, those same lying leftist shitheads who tried to pin Arch down as a bigot. As of recording this, the authenticity of the document was confirmed by a whistleblower to Alexis Nornqueen, who proceeded to dox them. Norn then fled the internet for doing such a shitty thing. While many of its terms are pretty standard, like, hey, don't leak any of our upcoming products before we announce them,
But some of the more malignant terms include that GW maintains the right to sue its contracted influencers if there's anything that might harm Games Workshop's image and reputation, and force you to cover their legal fees as they are pursuing you in court. Of course, Games Workshop simps are defending it on Reddit, claiming, "Oh, it's just a normal NDA. Nintendo probably has an NDA with similar language." Maybe they do. But this doesn't mean it's not a terrible document. Hoaglaw recently did a video, which you can find in the description, that discusses it and argues while much of it is standard, the parts people take issue with are, in fact, unusual, and are likely not even legally enforceable. Like the marketing post on Facebook, I will remain agnostic to whether or not the NDA itself is actually legal. But still, if this doesn't tell you that Games Workshop is a hostile and malignant company, then nothing ever will. There's no hope for you. It seems with every passing week, Games Workshop finds a new way to stoop even lower. Who knows what kind of shenanigans they'll be up to by the time of this video's release. But we'll finally get around to the video I mentioned at the beginning. In my video addressing the attempted SJW incursion into Warhammer 40k, I said this.
As Arch and Sargon mentioned, 40k is a very expensive hobby. The deciding factor for most people who get into 40k is not whether they see enough people who look like them, it's about the money. If you want just a small army to at least get started with, that's like 500 points. Again, it depends on what army you're going with, but you're still looking at least well over $200. And that's not even counting the paint, glue, brushes, and other tools you'll need to paint and assemble the armies. People spend thousands of dollars on their armies. Granted, over years, but still. At least in the United States, blacks and Latinos are generally a low-income demographic. Very unlikely to start an expensive hobby like Warhammer.
I guess you could still say it, but not as much as it once was. In the first video I mentioned, the one by Attention Span Labs, he pointed out as expensive as 40k has always been, when accounting for inflation, price hikes as a constant complaint against GW has always been a thing. And he pointed out they have been doing this since the 90s when he got into it. Fast forward to just shy of 30 years later, he points out with the technological developments in manufacturing, Games Workshop should be able to put out more models for less money, yet their prices only seem to go up and never come down. Furthermore, another scummy business tactic they make is manufacturing shortages of their own products. For example, GW will intentionally sell a limited number of, say, Dark Angels products, for example, while sitting on a ton of them, so Dark Angels players will rush to spend their entire next paycheck on whatever model they need next, and then some, in case they go out of stock again. This also leads to people often buying them up and then price gouging them on places like eBay. So it appears 40k is still an expensive hobby. Enter 3D printing. I remember close to 10 years ago when the concept of 3D printing was brought to the world in its infancy. One of the first moral panics around the time of 3D printing was for those of us who were into firearms, was the creation of ghost guns. Firearms made entirely out of 3D printed parts. And yes, even at the time, it was possible to 3D print a one-shot plastic pistol. And out of all the people I can mention in this video, I think it was back around 2013, a Joseph Buckley covered this phenomenon. However, being that he is Canadian, I don't expect him to get American gun culture and why we have it. But even today, I have yet to hear of somebody killing someone with a 3D printed gun. But when 3D printers first became available, they were a staggering $1,200, if not more. In his video at the time discussing 3D printed guns, Buckley correctly predicted that give it a few years, the manufacturing and downsizing of 3D printers would increase, and therefore, in time, they would be affordable enough for most people to get them. Because once upon a time, regular home computers and regular paper printers were too costly for the average person to afford. But now everyone has them. And as for 3D printers, you can go on Amazon right now and buy decent 3D printer for less than $500. You'll still need to buy the resin and other necessary materials, but overall, thanks to 3D printing, the wargaming hobby has gotten a hell of a lot cheaper for those who want in but otherwise couldn't afford it. Commissar Gamza has made several videos showing the glowing differences in prices between the official Games Workshop prices on their models and the prices of custom models made by sculptors with 3D printers. The difference is like, why bother? Some of the priciest Games Workshop models have a 3D printed model equivalent that are nearly identical in appearance but nowhere near as costly. A $150 model can be printed for as low as $15. You think the best solution to this problem would be for Games Workshop to stop with these fake shortages and put out more models for less if they want to compete against the growing demand for cheaper 3D printed models. But nope, they're being more than stubborn at this point, but doubling down on keeping their models more expensive than they should, and instead of competing with 3D printed models, they've decided to try to snuff them out. Other users have pointed out to those who make and upload 3D printed models that they should avoid naming their files after Games Workshop trademarks. As we know, Games Workshop is unable to trademark the term Space Marines because the term is a broad one and used to describe different sci-fi soldiers, and the term predates the creation of Games Workshop Space Marines. However, they don't care. If you call your 3D printed file a Space Marine and it looks like a Warhammer Space Marine, guess what? They're coming for you. And we all remember not too long ago that Arch Warhammer had his channel called Arch Warhammer. Games Workshop decided to send him a cease and desist order on the use of Warhammer in his name. So officially, he's just Arch now. Even though we previously did that for short, but despite Games Workshop, we'll now call him Arch Warhammer. Of course, the funny thing is they came up with new names for many of their armies. The Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, the Eldar and Dark Eldar as the Drukari, and whatever the fuck the regular Eldar are called now. Point being, they still will come after you, so we've seen more creative names. My beloved Dark Eldar can be found looking under the names Void Elves, and not too long ago, Bondage Space Elves. Well, it works. And yes, we all know the irony that Games Workshop has a habit of appropriating other obscure sci-fi IP, tweaking it a little, and calling it their own. But again, they're a corporation making money. They're a corporation with money, not you. They don't care that they're being hypocrites. Pointing out hypocrisy only works on people with principles. Unsurprisingly, Games Workshop does not allow 3D printed models at official events, at their stores, another reason why you're better off going to your local hobby shop. Some concerns were shared that Games Workshop may try to lean on them to do the same. But apparently many hobby shops are starting to offer 3D printing services. So I don't think their leverage, if they were to try, will amount to anything. For now, at least. But I don't think that will be the case either going forward. At the end of the day, Games Workshop may try to do everything in its power to stop people from obtaining 3D printed models. But like the movie industry fighting piracy, they'll never stop it entirely. And I think it's fair to say 3D printing is the future of not only Warhammer 40k, but the wargaming hobby as a whole and any model-based hobbies going forward. So now we've come full circle. And from what we've gone over so far, the writing is clearly on the wall. Games Workshop, the company you and I have been buying products from all these years, is not the same company that it was when we first started playing. Or has it? In that video at the beginning that I mentioned by Attention Span Labs, he details how he first got into Warhammer, I think he said in Christmas 1992, just prior to 2nd edition. He mentioned during that time the internet had only been out for a year or two, and if you wanted to buy your Warhammer models, you had to go to your local hobby shop and hope they had what you were looking for, as comic shops, which also sell Warhammer models nowadays, still just sold comic books at that time and anything related to comic books. But being a longtime player, going back long before I, and probably most people watching, he mentioned that the complaints people had against GW are the complaints people always had. Price hikes have been a part of Games Workshop's gimmick since the very beginning. The shops also had unreasonable rules about not only using non-Citadel minis, but also using out-of-production minis too. In the video, he also brings up an eye-opening email leaked that I'm going to assume was dropped just prior to the release of 3rd edition, as he dates it to either 1997 or 1998. According to him, a Games Workshop staffer leaked an email demonstrating that the company had always disregarded what their fans think. Games Workshop, even then, had always sought the parents of 10 to 13-year-olds to be the primary consumer of their products. Kids won't complain about their prices because they're not the ones buying them. And they won't complain about retconning because whatever GW established in the lore previously was before their time. And despite those who complain about the price hikes and their rules until they are blue in the face, at the end of the day, those people will still come back and buy more Games Workshop products. Because getting their fix ultimately means more to them than getting Games Workshop to stop their shenanigans. And for me, that was my black pill moment for Games Workshop. Again, I cannot recommend watching Attention Span Lab's original video enough. He is correct on every point he brings up. It is the logical conclusion to everything that the other Warhammer YouTubers have been complaining about for at least the past 2 months. Games Workshop thinks you're a joke. If you're the type who complains about their lore changes, their price hikes, and now if you complain that they're coming after 3D printed models and fan content, but at the end of the day, you're still willing to buy those Primaris Marines or the hot new codex that's about to come out, then Games Workshop is laughing at you. You're a cuck to them, a junkie, a masochist, a willful chump. You're their second favorite type of person who buys their products and they still despise you. As I said, the writing is on the wall. Games Workshop is not going to change, so it's time that we change. With or without them. It is time to vote with our wallets. I've done it before for the longest time. I first got into Necrons back around March 2011. At that time, their codex was still stuck in 3rd edition. But I bought and played them anyway, and loved them, especially their lore. But as I mentioned earlier, bad luck would have it. He who shall not be named was put in charge of writing the 5th edition Necron codex. And I hated it, and I still hate the post-3rd edition Necrons. I hate they turned the Necrons and their Catan Masters away from the potential Lovecraftian level threat to the Tomb Kings in space. Fuck that. I hate that they did away with the Catan, the Pariahs, and all that good stuff. I hate the Silent King bullshit and all those other cringy Necron overlords. The novel Nightbringer, based on the titular entity, was one of my favorite 40k novels, and probably one of my favorite entities in all of 40k. But now it's irrelevant in the grand scheme of the lore. I still, to this very day, do not recognize the new garbage Necron lore as canon. And so I stopped playing them entirely and stopped buying the new Necron models. Well, I would still buy the old models on eBay from time to time, because yes, I'll admit it, I'm nostalgic for 3rd and 4th edition. Though, kind of breaking this rule, when the 9th edition came out, my friends and I got a couple of the Indominus sets, and I obtained some of the new models. My friends tell me, hey, just pretend you're Necron Dynasty or Catan loyalist, or something. But knowing they've completely phased out the remaining 3rd edition era models, such as the Warriors and Monoliths, I wish I broke this rule. But anyway, the game is up. Warhammer 40,000, as we came to know and enjoy it, is over. I mean, overall, the 9th edition prioritizing objectives rather than fighting to kill your opponent was a more interesting change. But again, that's not how my Dark Eldar play in the lore, and I wouldn't play with them on the tabletop like that either. People like Gamza checked out with 8th edition, and although I was overall willing to give 9th edition a chance, getting pretty excited about the new shit they've been working on, but alas, Games Workshop within the past few months rapidly crossed the point of no return for me. I will be doing what Attention Span Labs has suggested, with one additional caveat. From this point on, I will be joining him and the ranks of those who are divorcing themselves from Games Workshop. I will no longer be shopping at their stores, buying their products, whether they be the models, the codices, the dice, any of it. No more Citadel paints. And yes, sadly, no new Black Library books. So, soon I will be buying a 3D printer, learn how to use it, and obtain my models that way. And the caveat that he didn't mention, buy out of print or used models on eBay. But another one of his suggestions, if one still wants to continue wargaming, was getting into a new game entirely. Battletech seems to be a popular choice of Warhammer refugees, so to say. As Razorfist pointed out, it's just as lore-rich as Warhammer. It's also in the far future setting. However, it lacks the grim darkness that gives 40k its unique flavor. Attention Span Labs himself has been getting into another game called Conflict 47. To be honest, I don't know much about it, so I'd recommend once again going to his channel if you want to find out more. And I guess if you're into Battletech or Warhammer, it looks like it'll be right up your alley. However, if I were to pick a new tabletop war game entirely, it would be none of those. It wouldn't be a far future sci-fi one either. It would be Team Yankee. Basically a late Cold War era version of Flames of War. Because I love me some late 20th century Cold War politics and military tech, all that other good stuff. But if you still want to cling to Warhammer 40k, because like me, it's been a hobby of yours for years and you can't live without it, he recommends trying the older editions. I remember a few years ago, one of my minor annoyances with Games Workshop since 5th edition was they were constantly updating the editions. The 3rd edition lasted 6 years from 1998 to 2004, and that was the longest time between editions, then 4 years between 4th and 5th edition from 2004 to 2008, and the same from 5th to 6th from 2008 to 2012. But from 6th to 7th edition, it was a mere 2 years, the shortest edition yet from 2012 to 2014. Then 7th and 8th each lasted 3 years. Time will tell how long 9th edition will last. But, moot point for me, because this will be my last edition. My IRL best friend is a Tyranid player who complained about the Tyranids not having a good codex since 4th edition, which subsequently led him to prioritizing his AdMech and Dark Angels armies. I often stated that perhaps we should consider getting into some of the older editions then, like 4th. It was the edition I started with, and it would be fun trying out the older rules. But he was dismissive of the idea at the time, but perhaps he'll be more open to it now. Like with Necrons, Dark Eldar, and now with Chaos Space Marines, I have always loved the older models. I mean, sure, some of them are kind of goofy looking compared to the newer ones, but it certainly invokes nostalgia. Although I'm not sure if it's really possible to be nostalgic for an era you never got to see or partake in. Pseudo-nostalgia, perhaps? I didn't get into Warhammer until the 4th edition, but the 3rd edition models and codices just appeal to me the most for some reason, and feel the most Warhammer. I can't really articulate. It just seems like the late 90s and early 2000s was perhaps the coolest time to get into Warhammer. Maybe I'm wrong, but whatever. Though there wasn't much of a difference between the 3rd and 4th editions, which is why they made the 3.5 codices. I'm sure to the real old-timers like Attention Span Labs, they consider 1st and 2nd editions to be the most true edition of Warhammer. If I could find the rulebooks for those, I'd gladly try them out. As you can still occasionally find the 1st and 2nd edition era models on eBay, though it's definitely at a price. Going back to the older editions may be harder for the new armies like AdMech, because of course for models and units that didn't exist in previous editions. But apparently people are coming up with fan-made rules, which, at this rate, I trust to be more balanced than what GW has been pumping out recently. But then again, this is all new to me, but I'd be willing to look into all of this. Some were wondering about a boycott of Games Workshop, and a movement could certainly exist to boycott Warhammer Plus, which, yeah, I'm not going to buy that, but I'm doubtful as to a boycott will be able to get Games Workshop to stop its scummy practices. There's a reason why I titled this section a divorce from Games Workshop. I'm not merely advocating that you boycott them. I advocate that you cut all financial ties to them completely. If we want to send a message they won't write off and laugh at, it's time to put our money where our mouths are. Even if Games Workshop won't change, it's time for us to be the change we want to see happen. I call upon the Warhammer YouTubers to do the same. It is time to turn our backs on Games Workshop and show them that we mean it. We will no longer be buying their new models and codices, and we will bring about a fan renaissance for the older editions of 40k and prop up other war games. And by Warhammer YouTubers, I don't merely mean people who make lore videos or about the goings-ons like Arch, Warhammer, or Gamza, or Major Kill. Because users like them are only a fraction of what Warhammer players consume when on YouTube. I also mean the channels dedicated to making battle reports, your mini wargamings, your tabletop titans, your blue table paintings. These channels will, in fact, be the hardest as their whole channels are dedicated and monetized around making battle reports and making videos about the new releases and the new tactics. If you are trying to reach out to them, of course, always be respectful, and don't be like, you suck because you're still in bed with Games Workshop. Just subtle things, like, hey, love your guys' content, it would be cool if you did some kind of retro battle report for 2nd or 3rd edition. Or maybe try out this new game that will draw in many new people to your channel. Something like that. No one likes a dick, whether it be Games Workshop or someone who is understandably upset at how they are now, but is overzealous in their discontent. If they get enough polite messages, then I don't see why they wouldn't. Channels like these will always be more responsive to what their viewers state more than Games Workshop will ever be to their fans. So with all that, we reach our conclusion. The sad irony being that a few years ago I feared SJWs might ruin 40k if they leaned into Games Workshop enough. They didn't. I'm glad they didn't. But 40k's end was brought about not by SJWs, but by its very owners. And not even through injecting shitty far-left narratives into the game, but by good old-fashioned corporate greed and disdain for its own fans. If by some miracle Games Workshop cleans up its act, I would gladly return to 9th edition and subsequent editions and buying up the new models and the like. But I'd be better off betting the Detroit Lions on winning the next Super Bowl against a team with Tom Brady as its quarterback. I don't take pleasure in saying any of these things, because as trendy as it is to shit on Games Workshop these days, rightfully so, no one would want it to come to this. I certainly didn't. If Warhammer Plus was actually worth the money, and they weren't resorting to scummy practices like headhunting text-to-speech videos, fan animations, and other potential threats to Warhammer Plus, I'd still be down for buying their products. But as I said, they've crossed the point of no return. All that is left to answer the question: is this the end of Warhammer as we know it? Yes. But will it be the end altogether? It depends on the path. We have options. If people continue to go along with Games Workshop and buy their products or just stop playing entirely, either way, 40k will be over sooner or later. Only time will tell. However, with 3D printing, fan rules, and older editions, it could also be a new beginning. A way to preserve what we've known and enjoyed over the years. This is the path I choose, and I hope others will join me in that regard. I am the Black Lord of Fenrir. Slava Warhammer 40k. Slava.